Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of On the Bright Side. I am so glad you're here joining me today. But today it's not just me, and I could not be more grateful for this person who is joining me on today's podcast episode. So let me just give you a little preface. I've always said a lot that putting out things that you want into the world works. And this episode that you're about to listen to proves just that. So if you follow back, there was an episode I posted called How to Get Your Color Back, and I talked a lot about that, but I also talked about how I read this book that allowed me to really understand myself and embrace myself with who I was now and appreciate myself in that moment and what was in front of me. And I felt like the author's words clicked so well. Okay, so this is where it gets a little crazy. The universe works in mysterious ways because I submitted a review for the author's book just saying how much it helped me and how his words were so beautifully put. So in my past, I've learned to shoot my shot. So that's exactly what I did. And I messaged him and was like, would you like to come on my podcast? Now, let me preface this by saying this was such a long shot with such long odds. He has over 1 million followers, and sometimes I can't even get in touch with someone with 10,000. But I was like, okay, the worst that happens is he doesn't answer. Just shoot your shot. Within the hour, I received a message saying he would love to come on to my podcast. You guys, I wish someone got my reaction because I just felt so happy, so excited, so grateful that this author, whose book completely pieced together my life, was coming on my podcast. Like, what? So I am so beyond grateful to welcome this guest onto my podcast. Now, let me introduce and welcome to the podcast entrepreneur, mindfulness expert, and host of Apple's Top 25 podcast, New Mindset, Who Dis, who has been featured on The Today Show and in Cosmopolitan and Forbes, and has even been supported by Hailey Bieber and Sophia Bush. You guys, our latest guest of On the Bright Side is here, so let's welcome Case Kenny onto On the Bright Side. Case Kenny, welcome. I am so glad you're here, and I am ever so grateful for this opportunity.
Hi, thank you. That was a great intro. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Very kind. I'm very hyped. I'm hyped.
I'm so excited. I read that book this summer. I had a lot going on and I saw it on TikTok and I was like, this is it. It was absolutely amazing. And the perspective really resonated with me. And it was a very full circle moment because I remember finishing the book and I texted one of my friends. I was like, you have to read this because I literally highlighted the book cover to cover. It's like more than halfway covered in yellow.
It's a lot of yellow, considering the book is already yellow. But thank you. That's awesome.
Course.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah, but I feel like we definitely think in a lot of the same ways, and it's like a refreshing perspective to have. So today we're really going to jump into that. And if you guys came to this episode wanting to get a better mindset, you came to the right place. So for listeners who may not be familiar with you, can you introduce yourself and share a little summary of your life story?
Yeah, of course. Case Kenny, I'm 36, live in Miami. I joke that I share my feelings for a living. That's a pretty great way to describe what I do because it's definitely not a traditional career path. I mean, I host this podcast, New Mindset, Who Dis. I've been doing that for almost 7 years with SiriusXM. I wrote the book, That's Bold of You. I've written a couple other books and journals, and I've created, mindfulness products that are all over. But really, it's just a passion for mindfulness as a topic, which means different things to different people. Of course, for me, mindfulness is the balance between listening to yourself and talking to yourself. A lot of people are very focused on leaning into your emotions and feeling what you feel and practicing the art of non-judgment, which is great. For me, I like to take that to the next level, which is celebrating how you can talk to yourself. For me, a lot of people know me from Instagram where I write these red quotes, but for me, there's nothing more powerful than putting relatable words behind what you believe, what you want to be true, your belief systems, your optimism, using words and creating mantras for yourself. So a lot of my work is focused around just putting simple language behind complicated topics. And brings me a lot of joy to do that. I've been doing this for a while, but I had a whole career path before this. I lived in Chicago and I worked in advertising for about 12 years. And I think, my story is one of just pulling on a thread of interest and what personally has driven me. I feel like I'm a different man at 36 certainly than I was at 26, but even so at 30 and several years in between, I think my dive and my passion into mindfulness and writing and guided journaling and all these things has really helped me evolve and reinvent myself, and it's brought a lot of peace into my life and
Yeah.
people. Like it's cool just to connect with people and talk.
It's so cool to see like the other side of it too, and like getting like that full circle moment of being like, oh, like we're actually talking. And if you guys could see this right now, he has his red Sharpie in his hand.
On brand.
Very on brand. And if you guys aren't familiar, go to his Instagram and I bet you've reposted his red Sharpie quotes like 100 times. I definitely have in the past. And that's when I looked on your Instagram, I was like, yep, they are connecting.
Love it.
So you have a wonderful way with words. You truly have a gift. And I mean, I bet you know this, but you are doing exactly what you should be doing. And you have a very beautiful way of turning negative occurrences like loneliness or anxiety or being too much or other labels into something positive. So do you want to talk to me about that? Because I remember in your book, you were talking about loneliness, and that stood out to me, like how loneliness is seen as a negative thing, but it can also be such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd say a couple different things. I think for one, like on just like a life path anecdote, like, I never set out to do this. This wasn't like something I always had like a or yearning to do.
Yeah.
But now it's like you can always connect the dots looking back and realize that it makes sense. Like I have a somewhat random upbringing. Like I went to Waldorf school. I took 6 years of Latin. I was really good at Latin in high school, and then I majored in Chinese and Arabic languages in college. Like, and I studied Hindi and Urdu as well. So like I've always been really drawn to languages and
Hmm.
was oddly good at it. Like I really am not very intelligent in like math and science. I always
Hmm.
struggled, but I was always really, really good at difficult languages. Pause. And then I graduated school and never touched them again in a
Hmm.
professional sense. And then now it's like 12 years later, looking back, it's like it makes sense. Like I'm so drawn to language. It's how you can express a complex idea with simple language. Like it makes sense now why I was always drawn to those things. Whereas in the immediate, I was like, what am I doing with this? Like, what am I going to major in Chinese and speak and be a Chinese translator for the rest of my life? And it makes sense now. It's always interesting how you can look back and connect these things. So I would say that for one about language. Two, also on the language note, like I joke that I I like to write in what I call golden retriever language, like as simple as humanly possible. And I say that because a lot of my aversion to wellness and mindfulness and self-development in my 20s came from the fact that I think we overcomplicated and we overcomplicate things. Like, especially in the day of social media, like we we use a lot of therapy language where it doesn't need to be used. We use a lot of diagnosis language where it doesn't need to be used. We use words like narcissism and attachment styles and these things, which are very valid, of course, but does that mean we understand ourselves when we use it? Probably not. We're just
Hmm.
using a label because it's what other people use and it's the simple thing to do. The simpler language you use, the more I've found you understand a topic, the more I found you understand yourself. So I always try to revert to simple, simple language, not reinvent the wheel. Say things that we know to be true, but say it in simple ways. I would say that. And then on
Hmm.
the other side is like my writing, which again it comes from the podcast, but on the
Hmm.
writing front, it's I try to do two things with my writing, and it's very simple. I try to help people feel seen so they don't feel so alone with what
Right.
they're going through. And then I help them try to restore faith in themselves. Like that's my formula for the most part. And
Hmm.
I think it hits the mark of what people crave, right? People don't want to feel alone in what they're going through. And everyone wants to find a little bit more energy in their step. They want to find the ability to start a new chapter. And I think my writing helps people do that because it's, for the most part, written from my experience and my life. And it's got that personal edge to it. Or at least it's got a level of empathy that allows people to
Yes.
relate to it. And, it's simple. I think I used to be really averse to cliches, but there's a reason cliches are true. And I used to be really averse to being cringe or sensitive or
Hmm.
whatever. And now I'm like, the more cringe, the more sensitive, the more vulnerable, the better. Like
The
that's
better.
where the true impact is. Like I shared on my story the other day, this girl sent me, she tattooed one of my quotes on her arm. And not just like tattooed it in
Uh-huh.
like some font that she chose. It was literally she had screenshot my writing, sent it
Shut
to her
up.
tattoo artist, and they traced it on her wrist. So it's like not just my words, but my handwriting, which might be the wrong decision. It was a little sloppy, but like you never know how your words can impact someone.
Mhm.
And I've got so many crazy stories like that, but I think a lot of that comes from just doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And, always striving to come from a place of genuine intention and not writing, oh, this is going to get a lot of likes or anything like that. I
Mhm.
mean, I always, first and foremost, I always write for me.
Mhm.
It is a selfish endeavor. I write for me, truly, because it gives me creative fulfillment and it helps me grow. Like I've grown so much from doing 630 episodes of the podcast. I've written 15,000 quotes, I feel like at this point. So
A
it
lot,
helps me grow.
definitely
So
a
I'm very
lot.
incentivized. Yeah, it's probably an exaggeration, but a lot. And it's helped me grow. So I always have that personal drive towards it.
And it's definitely helped other people because, especially like in today's day and age, people are scared of being their authentic self and being that relatable self. So when people like really go out there and put their all out and say what they're actually feeling, then it gets a lot further. Because I remember, so I had like really bad OCD and I was like, what is wrong with me? And no one was talking about it authentically. And I was like, what is going on? And then I finally decided that I was going to make a podcast because I was like, someone needs to understand this. And it's similar to what you're talking about, how we put relatability to our words and like can get it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and like a podcast, for instance, is a great creative outlet. And not just creative outlet, but a personal outlet. Like that's why I like my whole journey was I started the podcast when I was 29 because I just felt like I wasn't being honest with myself. I felt
Hmm.
like I was like borrowing and rushing and doing all these things and that like really, really frustrated me because I'm very type A. And I was like, no, I'm
Me
going to
too.
sit down and force myself to develop a worldview and say, here's what I believe and here's why I believe it. Like here's where it's coming from, not just this is what I believe, but why I believe it.
Hmm.
So that was the whole reason I started the podcast because I saw it as this vulnerable thing for me to step out and talk instead of just write and just speak to these things. And it's been really powerful. So I think like creative outlets, podcast, writing, YouTube, whatever it may be, like is not just like a in vogue thing to do as be like an influencer or a creator.
Hmm.
It's like it's for you and it's personal and
Yeah.
it can be really, really life changing.
Yeah. So would you say your mindset to think like this developed over the years, or do you see like one specific event where that was like your pivoting turning point?
The less sexy answer is that it's developed slowly over the years. Because like mindfulness is a muscle, right? You talk about things like 10,000 hour rules to develop expertise and stuff, and who knows whether that's true or not? It's probably not. But the more you do something, and specifically the more you do mindfulness, which
Mhm.
for me is more on the like journaling side, the more that I write down my thoughts and intentions and awareness, the better you get at it outside of writing it down. So, yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a slow burn, certainly, but it's like one of those like slowly and then all at once things. And like now I find myself in situations where in the past I would have closed off or gut reacted or became bitter or something, and now it's just like it's a lot more peace, it's a lot more patience, it's a lot more of the boring adjectives, but
Mhm.
like truly the ones that change your life.
Yeah, just like definitely over time. So today's
Yep.
episode, I want to chat about the idea of thriving as yourself because I feel like there's no other better person to talk about this with. So when you look at your back at your life, is there a point where you see like, okay, like I wasn't distinctly thriving in this situation and like what did that look like for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say in my like mid to late 20s, I felt like I was just very much borrowing the blueprint of what I thought a hot shot single guy should and would do, right? Not like being a bad person by any means, but just like doing being the stereotype of what that guy is. So like I would
Mhm.
go out a lot, I'd go to the clubs a lot, I would be very non-committal in relationships. I would prefer to let a relationship just die and fizzle rather than speaking up and being intentional. I would date without any intention. I would in my job just be focused on the money and nothing really bad in
Mhm.
particular, but just things that were very much copy and paste. At a certain point, I really started to sit poorly with me that like I was doing these things that again, they weren't bad, but I was doing things on autopilot. And now I
Mhm.
refer to it as living in the gray of life,
Right.
which is where you're doing things, you're living life, but there's no why behind it. The why is other people said you should do it. The why is social media portrays that as what a guy should do.
Mhm.
So, for me, it was that just frustration, feeling that there were like all these different versions of myself, none of which were truly me and I really didn't like that.
Mhm.
Um, to my point, I was like, I am pretty type A. It just like fired me up that I was doing things without having a why behind it. And I was at a certain point when I started the pod, I just got out of a long-term relationship. I was just tired at my job. I was running a sales team out of Chicago. I was traveling twice a week. I was like, man, I'm just tired. I was like, I need to, figure out what I believe.
Mhm.
And that's what started the podcast. And then, yeah, to my point, slow burn from there. It just, it became more of just a unbecoming and then a becoming and then a more clarity moving forward.
Gotcha. Because I feel like, especially navigating 20s, it's where a lot of people look to each other and kind of mimic what's going around, and they just see what everyone else does. And they're like, okay, I need to get a 9 to 5 job. This is how I should be acting at this age and this age. And it's just kind of like a cycle. And so, like, it's kind of important for some people, like just like me being a type A, to break that cycle and do something different. And you very similarly.
Yeah, I wrote about that and that's bold of you about the idea of like why do we conform? And we don't have to review the study in Solomon Ash and the science of conformity and all that, but like generally speaking, like the reason we conform usually comes from like one of two places. And I think you and I can both relate to it in our 20s having done that. It's like we tend to conform for two reasons. One being we don't want to be the odd man out. We don't want to
Mhm.
seem peculiar. We don't want to seem weird. We don't want to be alienated. We don't want to be lonely. Normal things, right? We are
Right.
averse to those emotions. And the second is more of a rationalization of we think that other people know something we don't know and we follow suit. We're like, well, wait a minute, everyone's doing that. Maybe I just don't really know the sauce. So let me just hop on board, right? So we
Mhm.
rationalize. Both we rationalize, but one we rationalize as they know something I don't know, therefore I need to hop on board. And I think the reality of life, of course, is that there's nothing wrong with being an outsider. There's nothing wrong with solitude. There's nothing wrong with
Right.
choosing your own path. And on the other side, there is truly no right way to do anything in life. I mean, if my example serves any purpose, see it as evidence of that. I mean, I used to be very traditional in my, understanding of career paths. Like my brother is a cardiologist, my mom was a lawyer, brother went to Harvard, like very traditional upbringing. And for me to, leave my security of my day job and a 401k and, stock options to share my feelings for a living was wild, was
Hmm.
crazy. I remember
Definitely.
my mom who's very supportive, but doesn't like get it, like doesn't understand what, how the steak is cooked here.
Hmm.
I remember when I told her I was leaving my job, she goes, "You're going to throw that all away?" And I was like, man, that kind of hurts because I wasn't throwing anything away. I was just
Hmm.
moving on to the next stage of my life. And, I think I've realized that on a practical sense, like there's so many ways to make a living and make money and do this
Hmm.
and that. But, to pigeonhole yourself by thinking that everyone else has the path and the sauce and they know what they're doing. And if you look out and see a successful person, you have to emulate them or
Hmm.
a happy person or a happy couple. I think that's where we get in that dangerous zone. So to break free from that, it's allow yourself to be the odd one out, allow yourself to be untraditional. And I think, there's nuance here, but I think that only good things can come from that.
Yeah, definitely. And going off of that and what you were saying, me being someone who just graduated in May, people have asked me and they're like, "Oh, what are you doing post grad?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing my podcast. I'm doing social media for myself." And they're like, "And then what?" And then like, "When are you going to get the 9 to 5?" And I was like that's not my path. And some people just like will not get that, and that's okay. But it's again speaking back to your point that not everyone's on that same time zone level.
Those people aren't bad people, right?
Exactly. No, yeah.
They're either living in their comfort zone or,
It's just what they
they
know.
never dare to look outside. Those people need to just like I say spend some time in Miami for one. Like not to pump the stock on Miami, but I'm from Chicago. I'm just living in
Mhm.
Miami for a year or two. You'll just realize that there's so many different ways to make a living. Like you will be inspired off the bat. You got to be a little self-aware because there's a couple, scammers down here, one or two. But you got to keep your wits about you. But like put yourself in scenarios where you can prove to yourself that there's no right way or right career. Like if you're only drinking the water of, being a lawyer, a doctor, or a accountant, like and finding proof of that, yeah, you're gonna start thinking that you have to follow suit. But it's cheesy advice to say like surround yourself with people who inspire you in that sense. But like put yourself in those environments and it'll just be like, oh, let's freaking do this. And anyone who thinks otherwise, that's cool. But like I know what's possible.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you think thriving as yourself looks like in terms of relationships you have with yourself and other people in your environment? Does that make sense? That was kind of a loaded
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a again, all these answers are non-sexy answers, but they're truthful and powerful. I think it's living as your best self, having the best relationships, knowing you're at the right place in your life and your career. It comes down to being honest with yourself and being
Mhm.
honest with other people. Truly. Like I think 99% of the stress and frustration in your life comes from not being honest with yourself and sitting in a space of dishonesty, not acting on it, not speaking up. I mean, and on the relationship side, I could talk for hours about how
Mhm.
I could break down every issue we have, and the majority of it comes from the practical of not voicing concern, but the more deep of not having the clarity within you to know that it should be a concern, both of which are elements of honesty. So honesty at the end, I truly believe is the key to breaking free of any cycle, of any imposter syndrome, of any doubt. And, sometimes it takes a while to find clarity from which you can be honest about. But the way to get clarity is to give yourself more to react to, right? Like, not to switch topics, but like a
No,
lot
you're
of people are
good.
really into manifestation, right? Like manifest,
Hmm.
manifest, manifest. And I think that's a great topic. Like, hats off to anyone who manifests. But at the end of the day, you're going to look back and realize that manifesting came from something you did. And, for me, when it comes to finding clarity or manifesting, whatever, it's literally just the art of giving the universe more to react to, the universe being other people, the universe being your sense of self, the universe being the dating pool in your city, like giving those people and those things and those ideas more to react to, and then from which you get clarity, from
Right.
which you get honesty, from which you act upon. So, it all comes back to those elements of not just sitting in silence and hoping that an answer will come and find you.
Hmm.
Mindfulness, as much as it's a sensitive, introspective idea, it comes from awkward, cringy, vulnerable actions and conversations.
Hmm. Yeah. And manifesting it's definitely like more just like the proactive version of yourself where you're just putting yourself out there and like seeking
Yeah.
it. And because you're looking for it, that's why it's coming your way. It's not just like,
Right.
I don't know, like ghosts or whatever.
It's definitely not ghosts. Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, I don't know why it's got such a weird rap. Like, I don't know. People have to talk about it like it's like this thing where you just kind of sit back and good things happen.
Mhm.
I believe very much so that you can sit back and have good things happen, but they come from something that you started, something that you did, some kind of energy or effort that you put out, certainly, always.
Right. So in your book, you were talking about how hearing no moves you closer to a yes. And I loved that because, especially going back to the 20s, there's a lot of no's you get in your 20s. There's a lot of re-navigating. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I learned that in my sales career, right? I led a sales team for 8 years, and it was at a certain point in your industry or in your vertical, you realize like how many actions it takes to get the outcome that you want.
Hmm.
So, in sales, it generally goes from like you reach out, you set up a meeting, maybe you send a proposal, then you do another meeting, and then you close the deal. So you kind of know that there's different stages of the development. And generally, well, it takes 10 emails to get one meeting. And
Hmm.
then, it takes 10 meetings to get two deals or whatever. And you can start to break it down and realize, well, okay, I got to make 100 calls to close two deals or something like that. So then you kind of break it down. Like you start making calls, you start hearing no's. And statistically, you know that if you've made 100 calls and you've heard 50 no's, well, that means all of a sudden your percentage likelihood that the next one of the next 50 will be a yes is way higher, right?
Hmm.
Just based on the law of probability and statistics and the baseline that you've established for yourself. And that's a somewhat boring anecdote, but for me, I've always seen that carry over in my life of, you can't be like, I need to go on 20 dates to find my soulmate. Like you can't always break it down like that, but you
Right.
can decide that within the universe of how many actions it takes to at least push you in the direction of the outcome you want, every negative increases the likelihood that the next one within that context and confines of the idea is more likely to be the positive.
Mhm.
To me, that's always pushed me forward. And
Yeah.
I lean a little too heavy sometimes into like hustle culture, but like sales beat it into me that the more you do,
Mhm.
the more you get. So for me, it's like the more dates I would go on, the more
Mhm.
likely I was to find my person, the more content I create on social media, the more likely that one will go viral, and so on and so forth. And you could break that down into every sector of your life. But I think the more that we start to realize the law of statistics or probability, again, I'm not incredibly intelligent, but somewhere in there is some truth to the fact that every no moves you closer to a yes, just
Yeah.
statistically. To me, that's always just made me more hopeful and optimistic, and knowing that no effort is truly ever wasted.
Yeah, my friend, she was texting us, and this is just girls being girls, but she was like, "Oh, like this guy te didn't text me back, like it's over." And I was like, "I know the answer to this. Like you're closer to your yes." And so that like it serves a lot of purpose, and it can work for a lot of different situations too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Instances like that, or instances where you're trying to really promote yourself with your music or art or business or whatever it is. I think across the board, it's a healthy mentality to
Mhm.
have.
Yeah. And I feel like to have that healthy mentality, you want to have a good amount of self-confidence and positive self-talk to help you get there. And we were talking about how you talk to yourself like you're trying to get back with your ex. And I think
Yeah.
that's just like perfect because here we are again, like just girls being girls. We're in our 20s and we're like, oh, just like fixating and like, oh, he ghosted me or oh, is he going to answer back? And that's exactly how you have to treat it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I write a lot of that stuff just trying to be cheeky, but like at the end of the day, like there's a very practical element of like keeping your power when it comes to your self dialogue. That's why it's like, I do a lot of these guided journaling sessions and mindfulness sessions to corporate groups and sports teams. And, a lot of the mutual understanding of mindfulness is, again, mindfulness is the art of being present physically and emotionally, non-judgment, a radical acceptance of how you feel how you feel, right? And I think that's amazing, right? You
Mhm.
have to feel how you feel. Otherwise, I wouldn't have started the podcast. Otherwise, I wouldn't be drawn to any of this. But it can't stop there. It has to transition into making that acknowledgement and non-judgment and acceptance real with human language. We have to learn to talk to ourselves truly. Because otherwise, like if you only listen to yourself, there's a lot of garbage in your head, a lot of
Mhm.
untrue things. Like if you're into any of the work on like subconscious mind or Michael Singer and like where do thoughts originate, a lot of the common understanding is that a good majority of our thoughts do not originate with us. We're simply receiving them, and our subconscious is working independent of our consciousness, right? So if we're only listening to that, we're filling our hearts and our souls with a lot of things that aren't true. It's our job with our internal dialogue, with the words we use to talk to ourselves, to differentiate and to celebrate the things that are true that we want to believe. Like I really think mindfulness is a celebration. Journaling is a celebration. Therapy is a celebration. These things that I think oftentimes we think are for like sad people or broken people or people who are going through really tough times, which, yes, of course, but the element that I lean towards, as opposed to dwelling on the pain, is turning it into a celebration of the resilience. And again, that borders on the cliche, but I just did an episode that reviewed this research from the Harvard Business Review that was talking about how people who have optimistic attitudes in life versus cynical
Mhm.
being everyone's out to get me, love is not real, it's a dog eat dog world, blah blah negatives. People who have the opposite optimism, that is, they believe in good intention and trust as a default. They make more money, they're promoted more often, and they're happier. So you can combine these elements here of some of the foo-foo around resilience and
Mhm.
some of the practical about being wealthier, happier, and better promoted, and you combine them, and I think you could find a reason to learn to talk to yourself
Mhm.
in a more empowering way.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to relationships you have with other people, how do you determine when it's time to leave relationships or situations that aren't serving you well?
Oh,
It's a
geez.
loaded one.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different things. I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you the one for me. And I mean, we can talk about like, do you feel understood or do you just feel tolerated? Like, what is the element of inquiry there? I think for me, it's really important that my partner supports my independence.
Mm,
And not just in the sense of like, I'm a man, I gotta maintain my independence because that's what men do, but because I truly think independence is a defining feature of a healthy relationship. Like I think you should feel more independent when you're with your partner than you do when you're single,
mhm,
frankly. In a more emotional sense. Like I'm writing this book that comes out next year. the first chapter is reviewing this thing called the dependency paradox, which is literally just an anecdote from child rearing and upbringing that the closer the bond is, the closer to the dependency, good kind of dependency, not codependency.
Yes.
The closer that bond is between a mother and a son, for instance, the more independent the son is empowered to feel, right? Because he knows his mom will pick him up if he falls. He knows his mom will look out for him. So he's willing to, you know, dive off the couch. He's willing to take a first step, things like that. The closeness empowers him to be independent. And I remember reading that and being like, that's cool. Like, that's good to know when I have kids. But I was like, that is how I think a relationship should be. Like, you should have a bond so strong that you're encouraged to be independent and not just like, I'm going to go play golf every weekend and leave my girlfriend behind, or I'm going to go on a girls' trip every week and leave my boyfriend. Not like silly stuff like that, but just
Yeah.
like independent in thinking, independent in sure things that you might want to do, but just seeing that as a sign of compatibility rather than I think a lot of people say, oh, he didn't ask me to do this with him, or she went and did this without me. Something's wrong with the relationship. I think we need to get ahead of that and remove that thinking. And we need to look at the relationship, the health of the relationship through the lens of how independent do I feel empowered to be? And that does a couple of different things. For one, it really combats everyone's inclination to develop codependency within a relationship, right? This is a great way to combat that. But two, it also tells you how strong is that bond. And then three, it addresses what I think is the larger purpose of a relationship, which is again cliche, but it's the purpose of a relationship is to amplify the happiness you've already created for yourself.
Mhm.
It's not to create happiness for you from scratch. It's not to build the life of your dreams from scratch. You should be two whole happy people coming together, and then you take it to the next level,
Right.
which is why I'm really at war with the term settle down. I think it's just a bad promise.
Mhm.
Like that's what I have to look forward to in a relationship is a settling
Settle down.
down. I want a settling up. I want a relationship that's so strong that we get more out of life together. So I think again, talking about human language and the words that we use, I think there's a real opportunity to celebrate independence, to not settle down, but rather settle up and get more
Mhm.
and amplify in life. And I think it comes from figuring out what is most important to you to answer your question, which to me is independence.
Yeah, I definitely agree because I think a lot of people, like including me and just society, we look at relationships like, okay, I'm 50% happy, so I'm gonna go get that 50% from like my significant other, when like we should have that 100% full cup on our own and just have like another cup next to us, just adding to it and not taking from to add to mine.
I like that. It's a
Thanks.
good metaphor. Yeah, I love a good metaphor. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so true. I mean, that also helps combat a lot of the feelings of desperation to be
Mhm.
complete and just like the idea of timelines. I see so many people fall into this idea, and I think a lot of it comes from just like, we're still hanging on to ideas from the 50s and 60s here that,
Mhm.
life begins with partnership. Like the point of life is partner, child, home, whatever.
Right.
And those are great, amazing purposes of life, of course, but it's not necessarily that order. And also, like, I'm a big proponent of love. I all day celebrate it, but there's a lot more to life than just love.
Mhm.
Love for another human. There's love for friends. There's love for life. There's love for learning. There's love for arts and crafts. There's love for music. There's love for all these different kinds of things. And I think we're very quick to forget that when we're so myopic
Mhm.
about finding a partner to complete me. Now I can finally build the life of my dreams. You could do all those things on your own and then have someone come along and make it even better. Like I was talking to someone the other day and they said that happiness is best when it's shared. I was like, man, I like that a lot. Like I
Mhm.
bring my happiness to the table, my girlfriend brings her happiness to the table, and it becomes so much better together, as opposed to neither of us bringing anything and hoping that we create happiness together. It puts so much pressure on each other in the
Mhm.
relationship, and we miss out on all the joy and happiness that comes from within. So
Right.
yeah, that's how I feel.
And I feel like we neglect, like going back to what you were saying, we neglect that there's other relationships out there that we just focus on, like, okay, like I don't have a significant other right now, like there's no love in my life. But like you look and you like may have like a great family life, or you may have like exceptional friends, and there's so much more to it than just like finding your boyfriend, finding your girlfriend, finding whatever.
Yeah. I mean, develop a love for reading, develop a love for working out, like practical little silly things. Like I think there's so many avenues to pour your heart
Mm.
into to build little joy. Like we're we're silly humans sometimes in thinking that like, you know, it's our job to get all of our life's happiness all at once, just like a big pile of happiness. And that I would love that for some people, but I think the reality of life is you pick up a little happiness along the way and you
Right.
lose a little bit of happiness along the way. And if
It's
we're
ebbs and
always,
flows.
it ebbs and flows, absolutely. And if you're only thinking that happiness is going to come from a relationship or some future moment where you get the relationship and then everything else is going to come
Hmm.
together, I don't want to be a cynic here by any means because I'm delusionally optimistic, but I think you're setting yourselves up for some frustration.
Right.
Pick up, create, amplify happiness along the way. And I think when you get to that moment with a partner, you're going to have so much to put to them and them to you. And it'll just be this uplifting, settling up effect.
Right. And I remember you writing something about how like having the absence of something doesn't
Yeah.
negate like the presence of something else. And that's
Yeah.
important to know.
Yeah. I mean, I repeat that a lot because
Hmm.
we're so silly sometimes. And again, thinking about the idea of only listen to ourselves. If we only listen to ourselves, we will quickly come up with a list of things that we don't have, that we want, that we lack, that we're not good enough yet for. We'll always be able to do that. If we
Hmm.
don't have the contrast to that, which is what we have, we're always going to be in a soulful place of lack, which I think is just
Hmm.
where how do you find lack? How do you find joy in lack? It's very
Right.
difficult. So we have to realize that just because you could put your finger on things that you want, those do not cancel out all the things that you have. And that is the gift of life, to be able to live in the space of contrast between those two and still be happy.
Hmm.
It requires self-control, but a lot of people just lean into what they don't have. They lean into fear of losing what they have as opposed to celebrating what they do have. And I think, being able to do that is really one of the most important abilities you have to be
Yeah.
happy.
And just to be able to thrive, it's thriving in multiple environments, thriving like in relationships, thriving by yourself, and thriving in all of that.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, do you have any final words or advice for our listeners?
Any final words or advice? Let's see here. I don't know. I mean, uh, I I think, for me, one of the like things that really brings me joy, and I was just talking to someone about this earlier, like an hour ago, about like what gives me confidence.
Hmm.
It's knowing that I'm not like passing along pain or frustration or resentment or bitterness. It's knowing that I'm not doing anyone dirty. Like, I think you make that your goal in life. Again, cheesy, but like make it your goal to be kind, to not pass on pain, to not
Hmm.
stoop to the level of people who hurt you. It does two things. For one, it breaks cycles. And for two, it should give you confidence. Like, we could talk about confidence and like there's all these confidence coaches and where does confidence come from? And confidence is
Hmm.
walking into the room like you own it, blah blah blah. I think true confidence comes from knowing that you're not stooping to the level of people who are unlike you, who misunderstand you, or who hurt you. I think
Hmm.
there's so much power in doing that. It teaches you your power. It teaches you what makes you unique, and it reminds you that you don't have to follow suit of other hurt people. And I think it's a real gift to be able to sit in that place and say, I've been hurt, but I won't hurt others in the same way. I won't pass along my pain and make it other people's responsibility. I think there's so much power in that, freedom in that, and then most important, perhaps, of it builds confidence. So I would just say that,
Yeah.
leave that there.
Yeah, I think that was a beautiful way to end it. Well, Case, thank you so much for joining me on the bright side. This has been such a full circle moment, and I'm thrilled to share this conversation with everyone. And I'll be linking all your social media accounts in the description below. So you guys make sure to follow Case for more inspiration and motivation. Well, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for
Perfect.
having me. That was
Of
cool.
course.